P-O-O-R? Jesus Christ. Poordom Rebellion Radio. Live and making more mistakes than ever. Because we just piled them on, baby. Been a minute. Still don't know what I'm doing, but here's this.
Seconds left, but Antifa, do they exist? Because some Democrats don't think they exist. That
it's amazing,
Republicans are bringing it up because it's a distraction.
Well, we'll have security hearings with the FBI and the Homeland Security Committee, and I will hear multiple Democrats question whether Antifa even exists. I will hear that in the halls of Congress. It truly is unbelievable. And I say, guys, if you're not sure if they exist, there's hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of videos of them. They wear a uniform, basically. They have a symbol. Yes, they exist. Yes, they exist. They're, you can call them anarcho-fascist, communist, whatever they are. In any case, they're basically a domestic terrorist organizations. Okay, they're destroying property. They're hurting people. And they fundamentally want a revolution inside the United States of America. And we can't sugarcoat this anymore.
Seconds left, but Antifa, do they exist? Because
building the rhetoric around a straw man, a boogeyman, what truly is just a tactic of protest, a tactic of mobilization, is being morphed into some kind of Cronenberg doomsday device for the Republicans. And what you heard was Representative of Texas Dan Crenshaw, a pretty far-right individual, speaking on Fox News. I believe this is probably Fox and Friends. Yes, indeed it is. And yeah, it's fascinating that he says, quote, "Yes, they exist. You can call them anarcho-fascist communists, whatever they are." Whew. Calling anybody anarcho-fascist communist is just calling them a paradox, almost like calling them something that doesn't exist. So it's fascinating that he would say that they exist, and the category and label you pigeonhole them into does not matter, because in the end it serves all the same purpose, right? Fuck them. That's the purpose of the whole rhetoric. To be perfectly honest, as a person of anarcho tendencies, I don't really like the antagonism that Dan Crenshaw takes against people. These are human beings that he's discussing, and he wishes that there would be more state violence upon what he considers domestic terrorist. So there's so much more to expand on the whole Antifa language and the whole the idea of an oncoming revolution that's going to destroy the fabric of America and erase history. This all really needs to be compounded very well and dissected in many videos. Taking the time to pick apart the narratives, the myths, and what really the facts are, because they take 5 minutes of their time to muddle the facts and send in some disinformation, and that 5 minutes is pretty successful because that's all the time in the day that people really need to move their beliefs around, or their opinions, or their perspectives, or what have you. But it all really depends on your own implicit biases, the biases that you hold before you actually take a position. A lot of the positions that politicians try to exploit and use is the biases that you already have within yourself. So that's Crenshaw there, using your fear biases and hate for anything anarcho, fascist, and communist. Because to be perfectly honest, Americans hate all three of those words. And so if you're able to put them together and then put an image on them, you will effectively create that straw man, boogeyman that you need so bad to defend your state power or your authority. So good on Crenshaw for being a croon. It's not a word, is it? I meant crony. All right. Moving on to my illiteracy. As I've stated before, through the Anchor podcast platform, where anybody can do whatever the fuck they want and upload shit, I have about an hour to an hour and a half's time. But that's not really a problem, because I plan to crunch this shit in about an hour. I hope so. We have material here that's worth about 31 minutes and 26 seconds, but I want to get it in just at an hour. And what we have here is Michael Knowles, of of the Daily Wire persuasion, I believe, and maybe a I don't know, consistent pundit at PragerU or whatever the fuck his job would be at PragerU, and also Dave Rubin from the Rubin Report, I believe, is his thing. This is great. They're going to be discussing 1984, and to make an early prediction, I'm certain that they don't know or they will not mention that George Orwell was a socialist. I think it's pretty fascinating because I saw a video last week for PragerU that Ben Shapiro had made where he was talking about how we can't forget John Locke because of his inspirations, I think, on Thomas Jefferson was his point, but also that the fundamental beliefs or principles that John Locke had philosophized and theorized back in his time. I found that very fascinating because John Locke has the name of father of liberalism. I always really thought PragerU and Ben Shapiro would be pretty against liberalism, but I still haven't really quite found the connection because also, too, John Locke was an American. He was actually before the birth of America, like the true birth of he was way before the Declaration of Independence. And so I still haven't really found the exact connection that Ben Shapiro wanted to make with John Locke, but what I kind of got the gist of is that it's a reappropriation of beliefs. Throughout that PragerU video, Ben Shapiro does not mention once that he is the father of liberalism. Not Ben Shapiro, but John Locke. He doesn't mention that John Locke is the founder and father of contemporary liberalism. Well, not contemporary so much as just the origins of classical liberalism is what I should say. And yeah, the only thing I could see is that the three principles that Ben Shapiro talks about in that PragerU video is to be repurposed underneath a conservative banner because it's being said by a conservative. So what I'm going to guess here is that in this PragerU video with Michael Knowles, a known conservative, right? I'm pretty sure he's a known conservative. And then Dave Rubin, the fake liberal, obviously a conservative, are going to reappropriate 1984 underneath the same thing, underneath the conservative banner. They're not going to mention that George Orwell went to Catalonia to join anarchists in their fight against the Franco regime in the 1930s. He went and actually fought fascism. George Orwell would be today considered as a member of Antifa. Now, remember, there is no such thing as a membership to Antifa. You're either anti-fascist or you're not. But George Orwell proved he was anti-fascist by traveling to Catalonia, joining the Poordom militant group, and fighting side by side with them, and then later writing about it in the Homage to Catalonia, which I keep looking at on my shelf over there. George Orwell wrote Animal Farm, which was kind of an analysis of the Bolshevik Revolution in a way. He was very anti-authoritarian, and he was very anti-fascist. And so it would behoove the conservatives to reappropriate his views and opinions and beliefs and what have you underneath their banner, because I feel like it just, without the proper research and knowledge, you can easily take the rhetoric and just move it to what you say you believe, much like American idealism. We're not quite there, but we can say we are, you know? I hope that made sense. If not, fuck it.
Here to help me understand the world we're living in, 1984 by George Orwell, the great Dave Rubin. Dave, thank you for being here.
Knowles, it's good to be with you. I mean, that is not a joke, what you just started there. This is the world we are living in.
I want you to
I was thinking of calling you Winston, and you can call me Winston throughout this. We should just call each other Winston.
We are living
because we're all Winston now.
Yes. Winston, the protagonist of 1984. Tell me if this sounds to you like a paragraph of a novel or like a news story about our world right now.
Wait, before you even read the quote, you could literally pick any quote from the book, and it is applicable now. So whatever you're going to say,
right. No, you're right.
I am going to agree, but I will jump off.
I've noticed this one actually, some people have been picking up on this. 1984 is having a sort of renaissance these days.
Yeah.
Every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book has been rewritten. Every picture has been repainted. Every statue and street and building has been renamed. Every date has been altered. And that process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right.
He literally only picked that quote just because of the fact that it had the whole statue and the erasure of history, which is something that the conservative right has been desperately grabbing onto because they're afraid of change. So, or even actual understanding of history.
Sounds like life on Twitter.
Yes.
Right? I mean, an endless present, and that was part of what the system was trying to do.
You know what's fascinating about Twitter and it being a endless prison is that it's not, and you can log off at any point. In fact, you don't have to have a Twitter account. But Dave Rubin knows that's not true. He has to have a Twitter account because he has to participate in the, marketplace of ideas in the manners such as this. So they are all actually prisoners to Twitter only because Twitter is a powerful platform, not because of any rule of law or fascism. So, yeah.
The Ministry of Truth, and Winston worked there, and he was one of the people that was basically using language to confuse people. He was intentional. I mean, that was the whole purpose of all of this, was to get people to question everything, right?
Well,
what is 2 + 2 equal again? I mean, to get people to question everything, right? What is 2 + 2 equal again? I mean, this was the ultimate purpose.
I want to get to this language point, because I think this is the real key.
What Dave Rubin just said made absolutely no sense to me. Was the purpose of the Ministry of Truth to be for people to question everything? Or is he talking about 1984 created so that people question everything? That was very, very fucking confusing. But to be honest, with the Ministry of Truth, it doesn't make sense for them to create truths as the job is of them, of it, which I think Winston's job was actually to go through previous articles that happened in the past to either erase dissidents that had been disappeared or to change outcomes, actually, to like the party 1 week would say, or 1 month would say that they're going to have a certain amount of rations, and then that month would come by and it would turn out that they're going to have less rations. So it would be Winston's job to then edit that old news editorial to say that the right amount, or what the party says is the amount that was always going to be there, so that the party is never wrong. So he'll go back through and change facts of history. How would that entitle people to start asking questions? It's a masking of truth to the highest of degree, to literally go back over everything and change it to fit the structure of the present. I don't think that begs the question from anybody. So it begs me the question of what the fuck did he mean? But we're moving on, so.
Just a quick summary for those of you who haven't read it yet, and
I'm gonna
if
skip
anyone
past
hasn't
this part.
read,
I'm gonna skip past this part. I'm gonna skip past him telling this. Just go read 1984 or go watch a fucking Spark Notes. We don't need his like summary of it because it's gonna be broken down into the little bits that he needs. I just want to get to the bits that he wants to give us.
He's still in the party, but he's in the outer party. There's the eyes, political dissidents. What's it called? The Ministry of Love, and they're the totalitarian government is referred to as Big Brother. Big Brother is always watching you through screens, through TV cameras, always monitoring you. Winston has this sort of illegal love affair with this girl Julia, and they're just trying to escape this modern totalitarian madness. Finally, they're caught out.
Doesn't torture us, and
they don't try to escape. They're actually baited into joining a pseudo resistance. See, that's what I'm talking about. That's why I didn't want to get the summary from him, because it's not going to be a good summary or accurate.
basically a contraption on him with
All right, just gonna keep
he
moving.
basically points to her and causes them to
Go get her. There's this intellectual admission where they say, what is 2 + 2?
Yeah.
And what is 2 + 2 is 4.
No. 5.
This is like one of the biggest parts in the book, though, that like I've seen so many times used in Twitter discussions. People always referring to this moment when they're discussing the post-truth world that we actually live in. That everybody is forced to believe in certain things, and they always bring up 2 + 2 = 5. That's why you wear a mask.
You have to believe that 2 + 2 = 5.
That's the thing, though, is that actually that's not even the exact thing that that party member was trying to teach Winston. The whole thing about 2 + 2 = 5 is it's actually just supposed to be 2 + 2 = whatever the party says it equals.
Look, everything, it's so bizarre to see this right now or to read this. So I originally read the book, I think I was in 11th grade. So this is like 92 or something like that, 93. It's a long time ago. And then I reread it over the last couple months. And, on Twitter, it's like everything that we're seeing, nothing means anything anymore. The way words are constantly used, or everything that we hear, without making this too political to the day right now.
It's hard not to.
It is hard not to, but so much of what we hear about from the left is exactly what 1984 is about. So words are violence now, but violence is not violence. These are things that they create to act.
He needs to explain himself, but that's kind of the benefit of talking on PragerU, is that one, Michael Knowles isn't going to challenge what he's saying. And two, he doesn't have to explain himself because everybody watching this right now knows exactly what he's talking about. But me being on the opposite side of the normal rhetoric that would be used on PragerU, the Rubin Report, and the Daily Wire, I don't know what he's talking about with violence isn't violence. Who is perpetuating the idea that violence isn't violence? The only ones that I see defending violence are the conservative right-wing side, who says that the state violence happening in Portland, Seattle, and numerous other places just recently over the weekend, all of those places were state violence, and they are completely apologist for it, and they say that it's justified and needed in order to protect the public safety, quote unquote, and property.
Actually make us question everything. And then once you question everything, well, then gender is up for question, and all of the things that should be settled are no longer settled. And then what I completely forgot about that I found was interesting is that one of the things that they're also trying to sort of untie, that the Ministry of Truth is trying to untie, is the idea of time. And it does feel like right now that time feels a little weird. It's partly because...
Dude, did Dave even read this fucking book? What? The Ministry of Truth makes... Let's get that quote again, because bitch, what?
Time. And it does feel like right now that truth is one of the things that they're also trying to sort of untie, that the Ministry of Truth is trying to untie, is the idea of time.
The Ministry of Truth trying to untie the idea of time. He almost had it. All he had to really do was say the Ministry of Love. Because Ministry of Love is the one where they would take them and force them into like this blank white building with absolutely no wall, Jesus Christ, windows, no outlooks. It's just solitary confinement everywhere you go. That fucked with Winston's time scale pretty hard, especially with the amount that he had to keep going to room, I can't even remember, 201 or some shit like that, but it's been a little bit since I read it. I think it was like 6 months ago or something like that, but I don't know. I feel like I still have a little bit firmer understanding than Dave Rubin does so far, just because I don't even think he knows what the Ministry of Truth did, so...
And it does feel like right now that time feels a little weird. It's partly because of the lockdown, partly because, we're trapped at home, we're all on social media. But doesn't time feel sort of strange right now? Like anything could happen at any given minute.
Right.
And I think that all leads to a sort of sick society where two...
It's also fascinating that he doesn't equivocate this idea to Trump being in office, because things didn't seem this uncertain before Trump. And especially before this year. Like, this year itself has become so incredibly spontaneous and uncertain. I feel like it's all to be shifted underneath the Trump exacerbating situation column. He exacerbates and exploits almost every situation he comes into, and that's why we see worsening conditions in almost every social issue that we've been suffering from since, who knows, like the early 1900s? Maybe longer. It's hard to tell how far back a lot of this historical materialism actually like reaches into the present. But it really does suck that Dave Rubin is able to completely blindfold himself to the idea that Trump is the root of the uncertainty in 2020. Not so much overall, because we've had these social issues before Trump, but the exacerbation of them during Trump. And he's able to just completely skirt out the way of that.
2+2 eventually will be 5 if they just tell you.
There are so many of these contradictions or absurdities that come up. I mean, the 3 slogans of the party that you've always got to repeat. They've got it on the back of the book right here. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. This could be the chants of protesters that we see marching all around the West.
Quite literally. I mean, one of the things that I talk about all the time now is that it's the anti-racists who are the racists
right
now.
This is almost like a 2-minute, like, this book club found its way to be like a 2 minutes of hate against the leftists. And that's because they're reappropriating George Orwell's thoughts as if they're of the right-wing persuasion. He was a fucking socialist. And I really wish we could get a live reaction from George Orwell on this shit, but he would just... I don't know how his reaction would be, but it would not be positive or really accepting of this. Wow.
Right? If all the people that are running around now proclaiming that the rest of us are racists, they're the ones that are pushing racism into society.
What? That doesn't even make any sense, but it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to. It's double think. For the anti-racists are actually the racists. Think about it. Just think about it. They're the ones talking about racism. You're not racist. The system's not racist. The anti-racists are racist. If that ain't doublethink up the motherfucking ass, I don't know what is. But, like, I just have to assume that Dave Rubin really does think that everybody viewing this is just an idiot.
Everywhere. They're the ones that are saying black people should have special dorms. And that...
Who's saying this? And, of course, he doesn't have to explain himself because we're watching a PragerU video.
White people shouldn't, be allowed to have certain jobs, or that they shouldn't be considered equally.
Are we talking about the voice actors thing again? You guys had over 100 years of animation to play as many characters as you want. And now that we're becoming a little bit more socially conscious, you're mad that you can't do a fake Indian accent to play Apu? You're mad that you can't have 3 crows singing in a Dumbo movie? All white guys? In crow makeup? Come on, Ruben. Come on, dude. You know that there's so much better arguments down there, down in the bottom of the barrel.
Mm-hmm. Those are racist notions. So we live in a time where everything has been flipped. And for the few of us that have a little bit of the spark of Winston, it's like, how do you make sure you're not one?
Are they saying that they have the little spark of the Winston because Winston hates the party? Or do they have the little spark of Winston because they're actually the ministers of the Ministry of Truth? They're the ones who take events and rewrite them and revision them to fit a certain narrative. Maybe liberals are guilty of the same thing. Maybe leftists are guilty of the same thing. But when you get first-hand accounts from people who happen to be leftists, no matter what, you get a misconstrued and twisted version of that story by either of these gentlemen, if not both.
One of
Every
the
time.
people who at the end is going 2 + 2 = 5. I'm not sure. I will tell you one other thing. I'm actually watching The Handmaid's Tale right now. Did you watch it by any chance?
I did. I've seen some of it, not the whole thing.
So I'm watching it right now, and the parallels to 1984 are absolutely incredible, because this is exactly what the main character, June, is going through. And it's so funny because the show came out a couple of years ago, and everyone kept saying, this is what's happening in Trump's America. Yeah. Except I'm watching it now in the midst of, what's happening with Black Lives Matter and everything else, and it's like, no, it's all the left.
That's hilarious. They're equating people's movements. They're equating the organization of people's power, protests in the streets, demonstrations of their First Amendment rights, as fascism. This is state apologencia to its fucking zenith. These gentlemen do not care about people. They have even less remorse for the suffrage of the working class and those within the proletariat suffrage movements. These gentlemen are comfy enough to sit there and point fingers at strawmen all day, trying to get you to yell at scarecrows. Maybe even stab a few, maybe even shoot a few. Because they're telling you that they're coming for your rights. Because they're telling you that they're coming for your freedom. That's not what the protest movements are about. They don't even have that power. The ones that have the power are the ones in the seat of power. And that is Trump and his ghouls. The ghouls created PACT, Protect American Communities Task Force. And they have been rounding up protesters. Kidnapping them, putting them in unmarked vans. We have actual secret police going around. And these two have the gall to defend the state and demonize people. You have to wonder whose side they're really on. Are they on the people who sign up for this fucked up book club and the ones who donate to PragerU? The small donations I'm speaking of, because of course they have very large donations, Home Depot being one of them. He looks nefarious. I got the perfect screen cap if you want to check it out on YouTube. Michael Knowles looks extremely nefarious at the idea of vulnerable people in the streets being the fascist movement.
This America.
It's this America. It's not
wing,
Trump that's doing this. It's the other guys that are doing this. So I think more than anything else, there's a beautiful thing when you read a work of fiction when you can go, holy cow. This was not only, it must have been true or true enough to have made sense when it was written. What year was the book written?
The book was, written in 1948, published, I think, in 1949.
Okay, so 49. I mean, think about that. 70 plus years ago. But yet feels like literally everything we're going through right now.
Yeah.
That's an incredible compliment to a writer and to a work.
And he articulates this concept. I mean, I think the great one you use is that the people who say they're anti-racist are the ones who are acting in a racist way. And the way George Orwell describes it is he calls it doublethink.
Mm-hmm.
So doublethink is this idea that you hold two contradictory ideas at exactly the same time.
Like that the anti-racists are racist.
So you can never admit that the ideas don't make any sense. But so, for instance, we have to get rid of America's terrible past, which had segregation. And the way we're going to do that is institute segregation.
Through
Who is arguing this? And they don't have to explain it. Why? Because we're on PragerU. Nobody's advocating for this. People want racial justice. That is the Black Lives Matter movement. To hold cops accountable and for Black lives to fucking matter. Nobody wants to segregate anybody. That's fucking insane. Unless, okay, are we gonna talk about then the Nation of Islam? Okay, they want to segregate, but they're not a leftist movement. In fact, they're very far right because of the fact that they're black supremacists. Just like Identity Europa, a white supremacist group, on the right. Yeah, it's a far right group. In fact, their leader coined right. So, segregation, separatists, supremacists, these are all right-wing ideas. Because, and I really cannot stress this enough, left-wing movements are very focused on egalitarianism. And they want to extend it as far as they can through economic classes, gender classes, racial classes, all of them. They want egalitarian, horizontal freedom all across the board, not segregation. I mean, how would that make sense? How are you going to fight? How are you going to, how is Jordan Peterson going to call us multicultural Marxists? And we're fighting for segregation? That's what I'm saying. The anti-racists are racist. The egalitarians are segregationists. They are instilling, through their own propaganda, doublethink.
Segregation. Look, think about it this way. What's like the hottest book on the left right now? It's White Fragility.
Yes.
What's the subtitle of White Fragility? I don't know what it is exactly, but in essence, it's something like how white people can blah, blah, blah. That's racist.
Yeah.
That in and of itself.
Right.
He's like, I don't even know what it says, but it's racist. All right. Let's look it up. Let's look it up. Since he doesn't know what it says and he can just say it's racist, let's just look it up. White fragility. Why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. It was so hard for Dave Rubin that he couldn't even finish what the subtitle said. It was so hard for him to talk about it. He just had to go blah, 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 blah.
Something like how white people can blah, blah, blah. That's racist.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is racist.
Yeah.
Forget white fragility. Well, but then if you say how white people, the implication is all white people are this, whatever this is. That is racist. So they hold these two ideas that are completely at odds with each other.
I might have to read White Fragility. It seems to really be irating conservatives, but yeah, I haven't really wanted to read it.
And they hold it because that allows you to believe anything, basically, at any given time.
This is the key. You know,
it's racist. Forget white fragility. Well, but then if you say how white people, the implication is all white people are this, whatever this is. That is racist. So they hold these two ideas that are completely at odds with each other, and they hold it because that allows you to believe anything, basically, at any given time.
That made absolutely no fucking sense. What were the two ideas that allow the two ideas that people have to believe for them to believe anything at any given time? That is pretty wild, especially coming from a person who has switched sides, flip-floppity, like, you know, ham on rye, bro. Like, Dave Rubin started out, like, straight up on it as a Young Turks liberal, and then slowly just went to the left is the enemy strain. There's a great video out there by, I think, Jose, that covers Dave Rubin's evolution, which he is one to talk about having fluid beliefs. If you catch my drift, he has extremely fluid beliefs. I think at some point he even renounced his atheism and has gone Christian. So it's just fascinating. I can give points to people for developing as human beings, but for some reason Dave Rubin's is just extremely regressive, just like continuing to pull himself into the cis white male that he was always meant to be, which is weird.
This is the key. Yeah. You know, so many words just have entered our language because of this book. Mm-hmm. Words like doublethink or newspeak, or Big Brother is one. And newspeak is the one I want to focus on, because newspeak is political correctness. Yeah. And the theory of newspeak,
I like how he doesn't have to explain himself,
is that the party, Big Brother, is going to get rid of all the old language that people have used for centuries and centuries and replace it with this new ideological, party-approved clean language, which sounds robotic. It sounds so crazy. Instead of saying something is bad, you'll say it's ungood or double plus ungood.
Right. But so what does that sound like right now? It sounds...
before we actually get into that, and he's going to say it sounds like the leftists and the political correct or the SJWs or somebody on the left, the whole point of Newspeak was to shorten people's thoughts. It was to use language, because we all use language outwardly and inwardly, which I'm talking about our thoughts. So if you can affect the way that somebody speaks, you can shorten it. In fact, even remove vocabulary words from them. Like, you know, I have probably always been a Marxist. Like, I accepted Marxist ideals because of my biases, right? But I never could put the exact words to them until I actually read Marx's writing or writings by other Marxists. I had to go out and find the vocabulary for the theories and for the praxes, right? By eliminating words, eliminating vocabulary from the English language, shortening, and even just using the same words like double plus ungood. The double and the plus are also used in different places throughout the language. I can't remember specifically, like doublethink and there's other terms throughout the book, but by doing that, you can then affect the way that somebody thinks. You can then shorten their thoughts. You can then, like I said, remove vocabulary words from basically disabling a way that they understand the world, because how we understand the world is through categories. By saying tree, that sound, we can identify a tree. But if we remove it, and it's just a thing, right? Then it loses so much meaning and so much of its essence, just for simplicity. And that's the whole use of Newspeak. The use of political correctness may be similar, only in the way that we want to eliminate certain language or vocabulary from people's thoughts or even the public consciousness, like the N-word, or calling gay people the F-word, or just using antiquated terms that were only used by primitive races, barbaric, hateful people who wanted to put others down in order to lift themselves up because that was the only way they could. Not the same thing as Newspeak. Because we're eliminating racism, not thought. But if you want the freedom to be racist, you understand how we kind of reach an impasse level, right? We can't cooperate on that level. We've reached a stone wall. So, while in a certain way, yeah, okay. Newspeak is kind of like the political correct terminology. But one is to shorten thought, and one is to expand human rights, which in a way would expand consciousness. So you gotta see the incentives and the motives and the benefits here.
Sounds like he, him, they, yes, her, all of these things. So again, it's like, wow.
Wait, Newspeak sounds like pronouns? We've been using pronouns for a while. Or is it that he doesn't like that he has to use different pronouns for other people? That's why you settle for they, them. Because nobody has a problem being called they. It's neutral. It's not hard. You can actually be a considerate human being by changing one little aspect of yourself that doesn't say people have to fit into the specific gender roles that you see fit. It's pretty easy.
How did he do this in 1948? I'm not exactly sure. I think there's some relation to, it's after World War II, and there's obviously some parallels to the way the Nazis use language and things like that. But it's still pretty remarkable.
And I guess the premise, as you touched on, is that if I change my words, if I change the language, I will change reality. Mm-hmm. This ties into the insistence of the government. You have to believe that 2 + 2 = 5, because if we all really believe that, then that will be true. And it seems to be the same thing when you call a he, when you call him, her, you have really substantively changed who he is.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about this is...
Yeah, because gender is an artificial construct. That's how easy it is. Like 2 + 2 = 5 is an artificial construct from the human mind, because if you go into another alien planet and they've discovered mathematics, it's not going to be exactly 2 + 2. but it may be of, equivalency, because humans find math to be written in stone. And it very much is so, because if I have one finger and then I put up another finger, I have two fingers, right? And if we argue these things, then we don't have reality. And that's the whole point of the 2 + 2 = 5 thing. But still remains the idea, the concept of numbers. We made it up, just like we made up genders. They're tools. We make up tools. That's what we do. We create things to benefit ourselves. And gender, for a while, benefited people, but it's becoming a tool of oppression now, and it must be dismantled, if not abolished.
I think when most people, maybe not my conservative friends, but when most people think of like the totalitarian, authoritarian state coming, they always think it's going to be a far-right state. Like the idea in 1984 is that the Ministry of Truth, like the whole apparatus, is somehow thought of as far-right, I think, is the idea. If you like something like V for Vendetta, it's the idea is that it's this far-right political machine that's silencing people and everything else. And yet, look what's happening in reality now. In reality now, it's this far left thing that's seemingly bubbling up from the bottom.
Yeah.
That's funny. He is right. They are all, well, he's not right, because he's saying they're seemingly far right movements. They are far right movements. Right-wing movements have been known to be elitist, exclusionary. They're not egalitarian. That's what the right ends up becoming eventually. But they don't want to equate fascism to themselves. They hate doing it so. But you can still do totalitarianism on their side, which you could say is pretty close to fascism. Authoritarians over there too. God damn it. But it's that double think method to have that opposing party to appear as the evil doer. And as Americans, we uphold freedom to the highest caliber. It's the pinnacle of what we can become. It's free. That's the pinnacle. That's our whole idealism. Freedom. So their objective is to paint left-wing movements as anti-freedom movements by using 1984 to reappropriate the message of 1984, which simply was what it's like to live in fascism. That's all 1984 was written for. Well, what it would be like to live in a technologically advanced fascism. But they're using that because they have an opposition, because they want you to see the anti-freedom, while they slowly and quietly in the House, well, not actually in the House because they don't hold the House, but in the Senate, to slowly erase your rights. Just think about Lindsey Graham and the EARN Act, EARN. Go look it up.
And that's an interesting flip on this. So it's one of those things where it's like there's so much truth, and yet there's still these like offshoots where you can kind of go, oh, it's not exactly right, but it's like it's pretty much there.
Well, even slightly beyond 1984, but still on the themes.
And that's the interesting part, is that the party is in power. That's why it's fascinating to me that they're trying to paint the left-wing movement as the fascists, because they are not in power. They have little to no power. And if Joe Biden is to get into that position, that isn't going to help BLM that much. Obama didn't do much for them either. We actually have no hope whatsoever in neoliberals. So.
And still on George Orwell. George Orwell wrote a very famous essay called Politics in the English Language. And in it, he says that the word fascism no longer has any meaning. All fascism means is something I don't like. And
that's not what he said.
Politics in the English Language. And in it, he says that the word fascism no longer has any meaning. All fascism means is something I don't like. And when you look around today, that word, probably more than any other word, has been abused beyond having any meaning.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the interesting things is the way that we all...
Hold on, Dave. I'll let you get into that. Let's see here. Written April 1946. Let's see here. Let's see here. We have a quote here that's from his communist pamphlet that says, "All the best people from the gentlemen's clubs and all the frantic fascist captains, united in common hatred of socialism and bestial horror at the rising tide of the mass revolutionary movement, have turned to acts of provocation, to foul incendiarism, to medieval legends of poisoned wells, to legalize their own destruction of proletarian organizations, and rouse the agitated petty bourgeoisie to chauvinistic fervor on behalf of the fight against the revolutionary way out of the crisis." Man, no matter what, Orwell's is always on point, and it's fucking hilarious that I ended up finding a perfect quote that describes both what Michael Knowles and Dave Rubin are doing right now. Yes. I don't see here about fascism being what people don't like, because that's not what George Orwell would believe. He doesn't. He would be much more descriptive in fascism. In fact, so descriptive he would write an entire book about what it would be like to live in a technologically advanced fascist state. So, what a misconception. But that's just them reappropriating a socialist ideas for conservative agenda. Let's see. I don't see anything here about specifically about fascism just being whatever people don't think agrees with them. I'm just gonna go a little bit further down to see if I can see something. I don't even really see fascism in the... I only saw it earlier. But this is also like a pretty long essay here. But I think the whole thing was actually about using language in politics, so I actually might need to look this up. I want to see this part here, talking about meaningless words. I haven't read this before, but now I'm very interested. In certain kinds of writing, particularly in art criticism and literary criticism, it is normal to come across long passages which are almost completely lacking in meaning. Words like romantic, plastic, values, human, dead, sentimental, natural, vitality, as used in art criticism, are strictly meaningless, in the sense that they not only do not point to any discoverable object, but are hardly ever expected to do so by the reader. Yep, so I don't even think that whole essay has anything really to do with fascism. But again, point number 4 here from his communist pamphlet specifically speaks about, frantic fascist captains, united in common hatred of socialism and bestial horror at the rising tide of the mass revolutionary movement, also known as Black Lives Matter, also known as Defund the Police, also known as Feds Go Home, also known as Occupy Wall Street, have turned to acts of provocation, speaking of the fascist captains, to foul incendiarism, to medieval legends of poisoned wells, to legalize their own destruction of proletarian organizations, and rouse the agitated petty bourgeois to chauvinistic fervor on behalf of the fight against the revolutionary way out of the crisis. That's exactly what these two are doing. It's funny.
We're all guilty of it at times, the way we all can use these words to mean more than they're supposed to mean, or we widen them. But look, this is something we've talked about forever. You call everybody a Nazi, congratulations, now nobody's a Nazi. You call everybody a fascist, and then when the real fascists come, nobody is going to be listening or paying attention. You know, it's the boy who cried wolf, in essence. So I think there's...
Are they deep down like actually just fascists? Because the way that they actually can't even recognize true fascistic behavior, it tells me that they're playing a game of secret fascists and they're all holding liberal cards, but in reality they're actually just fascists.
There's just sort of this endless destruction of everything that's true. I guess that's really what the book is about in many ways, more than anything else.
Yes.
That there is truth, there actually is truth, and
It's not what the book's about. It doesn't focus in on just truth. That's only a small piece of the whole scope of oppression that fascism needs to apply the pressure of the boot to your face.
Actually is history, and there actually is time and a chronology that shows us what is real. But if you can destroy that, if you can destroy that fabric, you can get people to say 2 + 2 is 5, and it'll make sense.
So I'm obviously
Whenever
frustrated as I read this, because I look around and I say, oh my gosh, it's really happening. There's this one bit of the story that a lot of people don't talk about, but there's this recurring old nursery rhyme that Winston and Julia keep going back to, and the line goes, "Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. You owe me 3 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's." And they seem to get this real joy, this real pleasure out of going back to just some nursery rhyme. It certainly doesn't sound like anything that now the party-controlled language talks about anymore. So there's this other part where Winston is getting down and dirty with Julia, right? She tells him that she's been with lots of men before him. And instead of being repulsed by that, Winston gets excited and he says, anything that hinted at corruption always filled him with a wild hope. Mm-hmm. In this clinical, ideological society, how is it that actually a little bit of corruption fills you with hope?
Well, because humans are supposed to use their imagination. We're supposed to hope. We're supposed to dream. We're supposed to have passion. We're supposed to have sex. We're supposed to live, right? Like, we're supposed to do all of those things.
Supposed to make mistakes.
You're supposed to make mistakes. Right. You're supposed to do things so that you can either realize they're good things to do that fulfill you, or maybe they don't, or they do in the short term, and then you have to reevaluate and all those things. But in a super sterilized world, when you can never break that conformity, then the tiniest hint, oh, I'm sleeping with somebody who's really been around the block, is suddenly really exciting. And by the way, we see many versions of that
Probably
right now
only thing I agree with
political correctness, which is sort of like, if you keep everybody completely politically correct all the time, suddenly we'll all start wanting to be not politically correct. Now, I think that's good.
I disagree. He was onto something, and then all of a sudden he's like, when you try to get people to not be racist, that just makes them want to be racist even more.
Right now, right? We need more people to break out of it. But, you know, the idea of political correctness generally comes, I think, like most things, it's the road to hell is paved with good intentions. When people say they want to be politically correct, they want to make sure that people aren't offended. Now, you do that too long, and what are you left with? You're left with just nothing. You're left with an inability to do anything.
You just have to consider what things are actually harmful to marginalized people. It's just being consciously aware because you live in a society. Stop being a dickhead.
So when we watch people cancel each other on Twitter and we watch mobs and everything go after everybody, in a way they're trying to pretend they're pious. I'm so great. Right. And if anyone else steps out of line and says something that I don't like, I don't believe, I'll destroy them because...
All right. I will also admit there is a bit of toxicity in cancel culture. There's a bit of like a fervor. It's true that like a lot of people within Twitter, they want to find an outlet for their outrage. So I don't agree with that method at all, because there are times where cancel culture has attacked the livelihoods of people who they just took it too far. Mainly because they're just angry, and we're all just very angry at the world, but cancel culture is not always the answer, especially when it's for comrades or people who are helpful to the movement of people's rights and of the like. So
I'm so much better.
Because I'm so much better, and because human nature can be perfected, right? I mean, that's
of course it can be. Of course.
We're on the path there.
If only we had the right language and the right erasure of time and the erasure of statues and everything else. A little more power is always good.
This is why when I think of...
I just want to add here, because like everybody knows, but it should be said emphatically that we're not trying to erase history. We're actually trying to acknowledge it. Actually trying to look at it, trying to become aware of it.
Newspeak, when I think of Winston talking about the corruption, it reminds me that political correctness, which is our own version of Newspeak, it doesn't just divide along ideological lines perfectly, or rather, should I say, partisan lines. It's not like it's only Democrats and no Republicans.
Absolutely.
And actually, what a lot of surveys show is that a big dividing line is wealth, how much money you make. People who would be considered by the lights of our society elites tend to be much more okay with political correctness than people who are at the lower rung.
What's the difference between an old crazy woman and an old eccentric woman? It's money, right? If you're an old woman with no money and you're babbling on, you're the crazy cat lady. And if you're an old woman who's rich, she's eccentric.
What a character.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that really is it.
This is one of the famous lines that Winston writes in his diary. He says, "If there is hope, it lies in the proles." The proles, like the proletarians or the lower class of people, they don't really...
You know why he uses that word? Because that's the word of the working class. The bottom of the barrel. Because George Orwell was a Marxist.
Really follow all these rules. They're kind of ignored by the party.
There's another word for that.
What's that?
The deplorables.
Boom! Reappropriating leftist ideas for conservative agendas. Boom! I can't really blame people who believe this stuff, right? Not Michael Knowles and Dave Rubin. I blame them for perpetuating these ideas because there's much more unifying things that we could gather under. But I don't blame the people who listen to these guys and don't necessarily question the things that they're saying, because neoliberalism has led to a lot of austerity for rural communities and those in the lower rung of society. So it may seem like the neoliberals combined with the leftist movements may be your enemy, but really it's just the neoliberals.
The deplorables, the irredeemables.
Yeah, the irredeemables. That's exactly what it means. It means that if there's any hope, it's that the people who the system...
It means the same word that's in the Communist Manifesto, not the deplorables.
System constantly throws out, constantly mocks, constantly tries to destroy. They're the only ones who will be able to say something true.
Yeah.
Even right now, just listening to what goes on in the political ether, it's like I hear a lot of people being like, I'd love to pull a John Galt one day, and just disappear altogether.
Come from Ayn Rand, another great book to read these days.
I assume you've done Atlas Shrugged.
Not yet.
You haven't done it yet? Okay.
But we have to do it.
Yeah, but that people will just self-select out, and then who will be left? The only people who will have a flicker of anything interesting to say will be the deplorables.
Right.
Yeah.
This...
Oh my God. They just wanted to talk about Ayn Rand real quick. I feel like conservatives can't talk about books without going Atlas Shrugged all the time. God damn it, Dave. How the fuck did that even make sense to you? Going from the deplorables being the proletariats to talking about Ayn Rand, and then once the rich people all John Galt out of America, that we're somehow going to see deplorables as the only enlightened ones. That's circle jerk talk, and honestly it's little dick energy, because the community is going to be the next renaissance in America. We don't need the profiteering on top of it. All we really need is the labor and the productivity.
Deplorable issue, I think, comes up. I think there is a sense that the elites are just not even aware. The party is not even aware of the seeds of its own destruction. But there is a little bit of a performance.
Kind of feels like now, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
But the performance is what worries me even most. You mentioned Twitter.
Yeah.
On Twitter, it seems like every day now, some random person is plucked out of obscurity. We are all whipped up into a frenzy to hate this person.
They did something in Central Park that
I didn't like that she yelled at a guy on whatever.
Yeah.
And now this person is the villain of the country.
Yes.
And then that's gone. Goes down the memory hole. Another term that comes from 1984 is completely erased and forgotten about. There is a category in 1984 called 2 minutes hate.
Mm-hmm.
Every day, all the people in the party are whipped up to hate the villain, the rebel.
Yep. And I mean, cancel culture does look like that. It does. It does look like minutes of hate. But like I probably have said before in past broadcasts that at times cancel culture is a necessary evil. At other times it's just evil. But canceling certain Nazis, not even evil. That's some necessary shit. Nazis should be deplatformed. They should go into their own kind of dark web and just stay there. I guess I am a segregationist, but I want to segregate Nazis. So, oh fuck, man, so much for the tolerant left.
The Goldstein. Goldstein is the man. They put him on the TV screen. You gotta just hate this guy. 2 minutes, then it's over, then you move on.
Yeah, sort of feels like The Purge, right? The movie The Purge. I mean, the idea is you get one day a year to do all the horrible stuff. That's what the movie The Purge is about. And yes, this is what we do. We find these people who are nobodies that have no effect over your life, that you've never heard of. They did something you don't like. Destroy them. And really it's never about them, right? It's always about the signal that sends across the world, which is, you don't want to be that guy. Right. You don't want to be that guy. But wait, there's one other thing I want to touch on, Winston, which is as he's working at the Ministry of Truth and as he's obscuring reality and changing words and all of this stuff, he's miserable.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually really interesting, because I think if we look at the people who are the most politically correct now, they are miserable. Because that is not, it's anti-human in many ways. To be so against thought, to be so...
I wish he could provide examples of people who are in the political, quote-unquote, political correctness movement, and they're miserable because they don't spend their time disparaging marginalized or minority groups. Who is miserable because they can't use oppressed people as their lightning rods. Because I find people who have to have lightning rods are probably the more miserable people. I am actually fairly miserable, and that's why I'm using Dave Rubin and Michael Knowles to be my lightning rods, but also because they espouse shitty opinions. Yeah. So that has a lot to do with it, too.
Go against someone joking, even if that joke crosses whatever your subjective line is. To be so against that is actually the reverse of what being a human is, which is about using your mind. So I think it's just sort of interesting that the people that were the ones putting this stuff into the world were miserable.
Are the
while
most
they were
miserable.
Doing it. Yeah.
And Winston, he needs to take shots of this gross gin just to get through the day. But then when he's got this love of...
You have to also consider his material conditions. His apartment was a TV that watched him all the time, and also a bed and a desk. And then maybe there's a kitchen. I don't remember hearing about a kitchen in it. And then also, too, you have to consider all they had to drink was Freedom Gin. They had Freedom cigarettes, which were poorly packed and very terrible tasting. They also had their food in the cafeterias that were miserable. They constantly had eyes around them, making sure that they didn't step out of line lest they get snitched away to the party. There's a lot of conditions to it that aren't just the fact that he works at the Ministry of Truth. It actually has to do with him just living in Oceania underneath a fascist boot. That's what makes him miserable, not that he has a job, a specific job. In fact, he liked his job. That was actually pretty much the only thing he put as much passion into as much as the resistance movement that lasted for about 15 minutes. He liked doing his job. That wasn't what made him miserable. It was the party itself. It was the world he lived in. So, I don't think Dave Rubin either didn't read the book or just didn't understand it.
Affair, this little secret hideout with Julia, all of a sudden he doesn't need the gin, he doesn't need the substances.
And by the way, they've done a couple articles I've seen about Facebook censors that all become alcoholics and miserable and suicidal. I'm not kidding.
Yeah, I actually talked about the article where Facebook had to put up money to send a lot of their, what are they called, moderators. They had to be sent to therapy for PTSD. But it's not because they're editing truths, it's because they have to go through all the complaints, and they see a lot of dark shit in those complaints.
Because they're literally doing the exact same thing.
If they were doing the exact same thing, they would be going through like Washington Post articles and changing those facts. That's not what they do. They go through flag down posts to make sure that they're not violating terms of service. And some of them violate terms of service so hard that they affect them they affect the moderators within their minds because of the dark type of shit that people can think of.
Winston is doing, they're looking out on Facebook and they're going, what can we get rid of? What word is okay? What word is not okay? Do I kind of like this guy? Then I can let that one slide. Do I don't like this guy? So we got to take care of that. and they become miserable because of it.
But the most depressing part of this book,
Yes.
I thought
Yes.
we'd already gotten...
And again, just to remind you, Winston liked his job. Yeah, he actually took a lot of pride in his work.
there.
So it was funny because when I was rereading it, I was like, there has to be something at the end that will kind of like want us to continue, right? Especially people like us that put our thoughts out there, right? And it doesn't really give you anything.
The most depressing part of this book for me is that there's this rebellion, that this revolution, the 2 Minutes of Hate, Goldstein, right? Goldstein has a secret book, and the book is going to tell you all about that party, and it's going to... So Winston meets these other people in the inner party. They give him the secret book. He reads the secret book, and it turns out it's a setup. Or if it's not a setup, it's still a setup.
Yeah.
Because he's given the book by a member of the inner party that in this system, it even has its own opposition within it. There is no escape.
Right.
Even that opposition might be a false hope or a safety valve on the utter oppression. What are we supposed to do with that?
Well, I think this is what people would say is sort of like our political system now is like this sort of fake duopoly.
Yes.
Right? It's like this fake, we've got, the Democrats.
I agree with his assessment of our democracy. We have a very poor duopoly. But that's not equivalent to the idea of the resistance movement. It kind of is, just because we do think that the Democrats and the Republicans are different from each other, when really, like Obama said, they're fighting in between the 40-yard lines. But the idea of creating a resistance movement to start a revolution or to bring out dissidents, to then reprogram them, punish them, or do with them as they see fit, that's not equivalent to a two-party system. That's a whole another level of shit.
They're the liberals and the Republicans, the conservatives, whatever. And it's like, it seemingly is that those are the only choices. And yes, as long as the system only allows those choices, well, then those are the only choices. But are those really the only choices? You got to believe this or you got to believe this. I mean, no one really lives their life like that. But unfortunately, the whole system, and in this case, everything that he was led to believe, leaves you with that. And that uncomfortability is even worse.
This is
knowing about it, right? Like, it's easier to just be a guy on one side or the other side, whatever it is, and then just run with it. But to know it and then be like,
what do I do now? Because you look, and it seems like no matter who wins the election, no matter which party wins, certain things just keep on happening. We lose more and more of our freedoms. We rack up more and more of our debt. The culture keeps going more and more in one direction. It doesn't seem to matter who wins.
I dare make a pro-Trump comment. I don't know if I'm allowed.
We'll certainly be censored by the Ministry of Truth on the internet.
Somebody's not going to be happy about this. But in many ways, when I was rereading it, I kept thinking, man, what they needed was a Trump.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because what was Trump, or what is Trump? He just sort of broke through all of this. If you're talking about how do you break the duopoly, how do you break the false choices, how do you break?
I don't remember what it's called. There's like a certain term for that. I can't remember. It has something to do, not white savior complex, but it's almost like a, let's see, like savior complex. Yeah, that's a savior complex. A psychological construct which makes a person feel the need to save other people. Nope. Messiah complex, there it is. Just believes that he or she is a savior today, or she will be. There's something where you believe that you need someone else to solve your problems for you, and that's basically what David Rumit is saying here, is that we always needed a Trump. Trump was the one who saved us from a 1984 dystopian future, when in reality he was the one pushing us further into it.
Break political correctness, all of these things. Who has been the greatest breaker of those things? It's been Trump. So it's like, in a weird way, if the book had ended and there suddenly was this person who was just willing to do it for some very bizarre reason, and perhaps he was orange and had weird hair, like, then I guess you see some hope, but you don't get the orange
I
guy.
hate to be more pessimistic than you, because I see the same sort of thing you do.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason why people in both parties don't like Donald Trump is because he broke the rules. He messed up the system a little. Though I do think it sort of remains to be seen if that will have a lasting effect, or if the culture and the politics keeps careening in this same direction.
Yeah.
The question I want to leave you on is, how do you think he did it? What was it that he saw in the 1940s that could predict our present moment?
Yeah, so I thought...
He saw fascism in Italy, Spain, Germany. What is up with these people? He saw fascism in the creation of the television. It's... Boom.
A lot about that because I had a feeling you might come at me with a question like that. And as I sort of referenced earlier, so he wrote it in the late 40s. So you're coming off of World War II.
Yeah. Wow. So profound.
So I don't know specifically, and I'm sure people have thought about this a lot. And I was really trying to think through. I think maybe more than anything else, what makes good literature or what makes a good movie or any piece of art that's true is that it is able to capture something that is timeless. And the struggle constantly, this is why the struggle right now, even though we think of it as Democrat versus Republican or Trump versus Biden or whatever it is, it's like all it really is always is you versus the system. It's the individual versus the system. And sometimes the system is better, meaning it's more open to freedom and more open to individuals, and sometimes it's not. And I think that is what was carried through from 1948, 49 into 2020. And it feels right now that the system is very against the individual, and
I think that might be...
I don't know. Do you have a better answer on that?
I don't know if I have a better answer. I think your point is right, that George Orwell is this individualist, and he's kind of looking out at the system. Though I, again, might have a more pessimistic view on your point about literature. It would seem to me we can see communism fails because it just totally misunderstands human nature. The way communism ends up is so different from the theory of communism. They're so disconnected that it can't work. And the same thing is true of fascism. I think the question we're maybe trying to deal with now
what's funny is that like, I don't like China. I don't really like the Communist Party of China. I don't think it's actually communist. But when they talk about the failures of communism, they don't necessarily bring up China as much because right now it's a success story of state capitalism under the guise of communism. So it's funny that whenever they talk about the fail of communism, they never really bring up China as it is now. But let's see here. Outspoken support of democratic socialism, that says right there, of George Orwell. Eric Arthur Blair, known by his pen name George Orwell, was an English novelist, essayist, journalist, and critic. His work is characterized by lucid prose, biting social criticism, opposition to totalitarianism, and outspoken support of democratic socialism. Yep. And like I said, he joined the Spanish anarchists in the Poum, P-O-U-M, to fight against fascism in Spain. So...
True of liberalism too. We've got these three great ideologies of modernity: fascism, communism, and liberalism. We thought that liberalism was the last one standing. It's the end of history. That's what we were told, at least by the people at the end of the Cold War. Well, maybe history takes a little bit longer to resolve. And as
this is what you're bringing to me at the end. You're handing me is liberalism dead at the end of this thing. This is my life's work.
I know this is the real thing. I didn't. You thought that
this was an incredible sham to get me here.
You thought 1984 was depressing at the end. Yeah. This is the most depressing part.
I am glad you brought that up though, because that is. The part of me that is fearful of what is happening right now is that the experiment of liberalism and the experiment of free speech and enlightenment and all those things, that it really does feel like it's getting to its end right now. That the end of it is that this more liberal, supposedly this ultra-lefty progressive thing will come in through the soft spot of liberalism, the openness of liberalism, and nice. Dismantle every statue, destroy every university.
That's the weakness in Biden that they're all afraid of. But Biden wouldn't have those big of reforms.
Crush every newspaper. I mean, everything.
All the great achievements of liberalism.
And that's exactly what this book is about.
Yeah.
So how he saw it, I guess, yes, it is a connection between 10 years before the Nazis were literally burning books. What are we doing right now? Yeah. We're not burning books yet, although NPR did put out that thing about how you have to decolonize your bookshelf, which in essence is a modern book burning.
The books,
They're not going to write,
really.
burn all your books, but they will say, get rid of bad books.
Yeah.
Taking your books, getting rid of them, donating them, doing what you have to do to get rid of them as an individual is not the same as a country getting together to burn all literature known to man. Or at least all literature that goes against your beliefs.
1984.
Right. This is it. I wish that we could have a greater
chilling,
hope here,
man.
but we can't. It is a little chilling.
So what is the hope? What really is the hope? Because as I was reading the end, I kept thinking maybe I'm forgetting that there is a glimmer of hope at the end.
You know what? Here is my hope, I suppose, at the end, which is a little bit of a plug for this show as well. You cannot remain a slave if you are literate and you read. You can't do it. This is why all the totalitarian regimes in history have tried to burn all of the books, have tried to stop people from reading, have tried to have anti-literacy laws. And what George Orwell is describing here, the reason it resonates with, not just now, perhaps at a particularly Orwellian moment, but it has resonated for so many years, is because he is describing something that we know is real, something that we experience to varying degrees throughout our entire relationship to politics. Mm-hmm. And as they burn the books, as they topple the statues, as they erase the history, as they memory hole everything that we cherish.
You see what they're doing? Like, nobody's burning the books.
That we thought we could rely on. There is still a little bit of hope.
They moved decluttering to burning.
I think for those of us who are willing to crack the spine of a book or two and see the vast difference between reality and all the propaganda that the system is spewing at us.
All right, I'm going to end it. I don't care what their answer is. This is the end of the episode. But to answer that, Michael Knowles is wrong. The best way to actually question everything is not to read a book that Michael Knowles tells you to read. In fact, the best way to expand your knowledge and open your mind is actually to take in different propagandas. I'm a leftist, but I watch a fuck ton of right-wing propaganda because I think maybe someday they're going to have a logical argument that's going to persuade me in some form or fashion. But that has yet to happen because most of it is based on irrational emotions to fit an objective of closing individual rights for the sake of business ventures. So, he's wrong. The best way to actually expand your intelligence is to take in more than just PragerU, more than just Daily Wire, more than just the right-wing stuff you take in. Try to get in as many leftists as you can as well, because the more you obtain from the left and right wing, both wings, the higher you can fly. Yep, that was my cheesy end to what has been a great pizza pie of knowledge and human growth. If you enjoyed that, do all those things that people say at the end of their videos. Find me on your favorite podcasting streaming. Go to poordomrebellion.net where I put up my little scribbling writings. And don't forget to stay revolutionary and also ultra healthy. I'll be back with more Debunk the Right. Thank you, and I love you.